Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. The love and blessings of the Mother and Shri Aurobindo to all of you. Today, two of us, Aditi and I, are here in front of you, the two faces of whom you may be tired by now. Uh, we'll be talking about integral yoga. And although many of you joining us are very familiar with integral yoga already, uh, some others who view this recording later on may not be. And because of the misunderstanding or the popular idea, at least I might say, of yoga that exists, even if you say integral yoga, people concentrate on the word yoga. And they feel integral is just by the way, and they don't attach much significance to it. And yoga in their mind is equated with the physical practices of yoga, the asanas and the pranayamas, and at the most, the technique of meditation. So, although I mean, many of you are already familiar with how integral yoga is not just these techniques, it goes much beyond that. Uh, it may be a good idea to talk about it again because something which is true but not very popular bears repeating in different forms. And that is what we are here to do today. Uh, Aditi, who has been practicing integral yoga for many years, much more longer than her appearance would suggest. Maybe we can start with her to share uh, what she thinks of integral yoga and anything else that she wants to share about its principles or practice.
Namaste. Thank you. I was just in my head kind of thinking when you said about like share, and you ended with principle and processes, and immediately processes caught my attention because that is what I've been really, really focusing also in my journey. And also when we were going through the title, I was like, principles, I think I will give it to you to discuss because it looks very intellectual and something like something needs to be decoded, which I don't feel confident enough to decode in at the intellectual level. But processes, I'll just talk about how I live and if something comes out of it. But essentially, when we talk about integral yoga, we are just trying to live in freedom, and that freedom we explore rooted in sincerity. So the combination of freedom and sincerity really sums up integral yoga for me. That Aurobindo has kind of given us a framework which can be so much utilized as our own individual personality unfolds. So the more and more I get to know myself, the little pockets of hidden needs, hidden desires, hidden ambitions in me, the more I throw light on it, the more suddenly I also see the parts in me which can deal with it. So the simultaneity of discovery in your own self between what you are not capable of or you're not so good enough, but also what you're capable of and what you're good enough at, and how the combination of two can work in the light of the higher. So that becomes a step-by-step process, a building block towards really achieving what the highest in you is. So all of us hold the highest in us, and the discovery, like we have always spoken about it, the discovery of the highest, at every moment we have the highest and we have an absolute highest. So the building of moment to moment of highest to the absolute highest is the journey of integral yoga. So it's really like how if you really want to speak about it to a small child, no, it's like something of that highest is given to you. It's like the treasure hunt. So it's like something of that highest absolute of which the world is created is also hidden in you. And now with the help of your personality, whatever attributes of your personality you know about, with that help, now you just venture into that treasure hunt and that find the divine spark. And the process of finding is also in the guiding light of that light. So it becomes a very covered, it's really like in that cocoon where the divine is like really holding you. It's like, I'm there, you just walk. So you enjoy the treasure hunt because you know you already have it. So the sense of satisfaction that yes, it's there, and the thrill of discovery. And that is how enjoyment becomes a very key element. The happiness, the ananda becomes a key element of discovering on the path of yoga. And that is why we don't see ourselves more aligning to that old idea of, say, doing sadhana or doing yoga, of not participating in the world or not interacting in the world so much. Like more and more when I talk to younger people, I also like when you're talking about integral yoga, it looks like more of an interactive yoga. So the more you participate in the world, the more things about you are revealed and the more you're able to offer. Because if you really see the key pillars on which integral yoga stands, it is remember and offer. So every time I'm interacting with the world, like right now, if I'm interacting with the audience, it just gives us that space to really hold and see that every action that comes out of me is in an offering to the highest in me. So this becomes more like a fun journey. Every moment you're discovering something new about you with the surety and sincerity that there's something much higher. So there is a holding and there's also a freedom of living. So when you live, you come back to that holding, this holding gets strengthened. So this becomes a journey on a day-to-day basis, right here in the world participating. So yeah, these are the thoughts that come to me when you ask me more about the process of integral yoga, which is, and if then I want to really go back to the basic, it's like everybody who gets to enter it, the first question is, what is integral yoga? I think most of the people just get stuck onto the what part. But in my own experience, it's the how that leads you to the what. Because if before the how, if I'm too occupied with the what, then I'm trying to play safe that if I have an intellectual discovery, then it will be an experiential escapade in that sense. But I think when it comes to integral yoga, it is not so much about an intellectual understanding, but really that combination of aspiration and that faith and walk. And in the how, you discover the what. I mean, that is another thing which I wanted to bring awareness that because the logical mind thinks and tries to find about that, okay, how to do it, what is the duration of it, because that's so occupied with the idea of yoga that it requires a definite duration. And the moment you say duration, you know the most celebrated statement, all life is yoga. So the duration is your life. And if you need any, say, when you look at yoga, do you need any props? Your personality is your prop. So you just need your own self, you just need on your own life. And the more you start looking at your life from a much lighter perspective in terms of the higher light and also in terms of not taking yourself seriously. So light and lighter really comes together and then you just walk the path. So yeah, I think to begin with, that is what I think. Maybe you can add something to it and we see how it can get more clearer.
I'm glad the way we started with processes rather than the principles, because although in terms of a linear, way of thinking, principles should precede the processes, and that's how it was in the title. But in practice, actually, this is a more uh, rational sequence. Those of us who drove Fiats and Ambassadors a long time back, uh, if we had to understand something about the car, there was one way of doing it might have been to get hold of a book which tells us about the different parts of the car, how they function, and how the car runs. But that's not how we ended up learning, because we just wanted to drive the car. But still, we ended up learning quite a bit about the car by actually driving it, and sometimes when it broke down, taking it to the mechanic and seeing what he does. So those were the processes that taught us quite a bit about the car. And so I'm glad that we started with this. But since I have been asked to talk about the principles, let me touch on them briefly. Integral yoga is a synthesis. It's a synthesis, a very powerful synthesis, which was worked out by Sri Aurobindo in the early 20th century. The major sort of work is synthesis of yoga, which he started writing in the Arya in 1914. So that's when we can say that the was the beginning of laying down of the principles of integral yoga. And why he did that? Why did he have to work out a synthesis? Is outlined because the practice of yoga had come to be identified with the externals, which had come to subordinate the spirit of yoga. And we can easily relate to it because to that weakness has still not disappeared. The focus is again on the externals, that is the techniques. And then, he took up the major schools of yoga, particularly Hatha Yoga, Raja Yoga, Yoga of the Gita, and Tantra Yoga, and worked out a synthesis. And this synthesis, he emphasized, is not a combination of them, just placing them side by side, but it is looking at the central principle underlying all of them, which is essentially working towards self perfection with the ultimate aim of union with the divine. The two are in a way synonymous because uh, we, by definition, accept that human beings are imperfect, only the divine is perfect. So, if we are working towards self perfection, we are trying to approach the perfection of the divine. And if we reach the goal, we have achieved some sort of a union with the divine. So, that's what in the general principle of all schools of yoga is. Now, to this, he added the particular aspects of different types of yoga, these different schools which it incorporated in the synthesis to make it complete. And from Hatha Yoga, he took the principle that the body is important, should not be neglected. From Raja Yoga, that the mind is also important as a tool and therefore should not be neglected. From Tantra Yoga, that everything that we happens in life can be a tool for uh, uh, being on the path, for progressing on the path of yoga. And from the yoga of the Gita, on which integral yoga leans the most heavily, he took many things. Firstly, that there is no single way of approaching the goal. The disciple has the flexibility of choosing the path of action or knowledge or devotion. And generally, it will be a combination of these. And if the person stays long enough and sincerely enough on even one of them, eventually he'll end up practicing all the three. So that is one of the things that he took from there, that the flexibility of the path. And in fact, he made it even more broad and general so that uh, the seeker herself can carve out her own path. And as Aditi said, that we have a lot of freedom in this to carve out our own path. And greater freedom also increases the necessity for greater sincerity. So sincerity becomes even more necessary when you have that freedom, because if you have clearly laid down guidelines which you have to follow to the letter, then maybe somehow you will be able to do them. And sincerity is still important, but uh, it can be to some extent taken for granted. But when you have total freedom, then sincerity becomes all the more important. So, total freedom about carving out your own path depending upon your inclinations, temperament, and circumstances. So, you can carve out your own path. Another thing that he took from the yoga of the Gita is that the emphasis is not on the terminal point, that is the ultimate goal. Yoga is a graded process. And therefore, you can uh, sort of take it step by step. And although the goal we know, but we don't have to be obsessed with the goal, because getting obsessed with the goal will not bring it any closer. It will actually outdistance itself. The goal will get farther away if we get obsessed with it. Yet another thing that he took from the Gita is that we don't need external renunciation for the practice of yoga. That is, we don't have to renounce the world, go away to the Himalayas or to a cave for the sadhana. Uh, the work itself can be our sadhana. We can engage in worldly action. And in fact, all our actions should be performed from the yogic poise, yogastha kuru karmani. So perform all your actions from the yogic poise. So these are some of the basic things which are there in the Gita, and integral yoga leans very heavily on each of these. And that's what makes it difficult to understand. Uh, Aditi mentioned the idea of renunciation, which many people assume is an essential part of serious yoga, but it is not. And then she talked about some particular aspects of sadhana, as if sadhana is something special. You know, people like me who live in an ashram are sometimes asked, do you get any time for your sadhana? Now, what they mean is that do you get some time which you can set aside for asanas, pranayamas, and meditation, or maybe devotional sort of practices or ritualistic practices? They think that is sadhana, and the rest of the work is not sadhana. But in fact, the work is the simplest and safest sadhana. That's what the mother has said. And our sadhana is primarily through work. Not that the techniques are not allowed. To some extent, they are necessary because the body and the mind don't have to be neglected. But then, not to such an extent that we feel that we have to spend as much time as possible on those techniques, and also that that is sadhana and the work is not sadhana. That is not the type of division we have. And also, not renouncing can create difficulties, because if you are clear that I have renounced the world, then people understand that, well, you renounced the world, now you are in a place where you cannot interact with the rest of the world. But integral yoga is interactive. While I mean that creates difficulties, because there's no clear sort of division between what interactions and how those interactions should be and so on. But you have your own inner guide to guide you with whom you will interact, to what extent, and in what way. And a general guideline the mother has given is that in all our relationships, other than with the divine, in all other relationships, egoless kindness and goodwill. Very simply put, but very profound. Egoless kindness and goodwill. That is what should dominate all our other relationships. So relationships can be there, interaction can be there, but it should be egoless, kindness, and goodwill. So that is the idea of interaction. Duration, again, I mentioned all life, which means all life is suitable for the practice of yoga. And so these are some of the principles, and maybe Aditi can continue with some more processes now.
I just wanted to build on, there are two words which I caught from while you were sharing this. One was the word work, and another word was egoless. I think I personally feel that these are the two words which are really overused in any sort of self-work. And also because somehow we have not learned to exist without action. So wherever the action is celebrated, we kind of associate our sense of identity with action. And that's why there are high chances, especially in the space of integral yoga, to misinterpret work, like what really work means. Because if I truly look into the concept, even existing consciously is work. And what am I doing with existing is an extension of that work. But if extension of who I am becomes my identity, then who I am, I just drift apart from the original creation, so to speak. And especially when you're like, oh, I don't have to sit in isolation, I have to be out there in the world. But then sometimes there's a chance of error to creep in, that I have not sat with myself enough to build that strength or build that energy or purify that energy or unify that energy with the absolute energy to go out in the world and spread that. So there also has to a balance between what is my understanding and experience of work. So today, if I'm not doing anything, I'm just sitting, then am I not feeling a sense of loss, like how young people call that fear of missing out? Because if I have that sense of fear of missing out, and that is why I want to engage with the world, that is why I want to participate in interactive yoga, then there's something of a red flag which needs attention. But I'm equally settled with not doing anything. I'm not thinking of as if I'm wasting my time. With the same poise, I'm also able to say work for 18 hours. So there's no shift in my poise, in existence, and in expression. That is an indicator of that, yes, I am connected to, say, an infinite source of energy. Because it's the vital energy which pushes, which drives to express. But the divine energy can also hold in absolute silence. Divine energy will never, in our own sense, will say, it's a very different, subtle, peaceful push. So even if you're looking at indicators in our own self, that when to work, when to rest, when to pause. So though I'm feeling a lot of energy, but if there's a sense of peace and certitude in an energy, there's a different nudge to act in the world. But if there's a vital energy which is like really fearful that I'm not existing or I'm losing that strength, I want to be a part of the world, then that's a different kind of push. So another logical understanding or experience in this field of yoga is to really recognize your indicators and purify them with time. So what is my indicator which, say, pulls me or pushes me or makes me feel a certain way? And the more I will recognize my indicators, according to that, I'll also have a well-developed, established relationship with the sense of ego I hold. So another word which you used was egoless. That is another word which, especially in modern ways of self-work, is used. And we know that we see ego as a sense of identity, which is an individualization required to express ourselves. That you see somebody on the screen, you see the name what's written Aditi, you see a face, That's a surface identity that I carry, which is required to express, which I have inside of me. I still need a frame. So ego is a frame of reference which I use. But like recently I was reading some of the works from the mother, and that one line really stayed with me. Somewhere she has written about, of course she has spoken about it, but I read it. It's like divinization of nature and not destruction of nature, something on those lines. And I found it very apt in terms of working on a surface nature, that the moment we have that urgency of rejecting something which we find out, that urgency takes away the process of working on it. That the moment I find something in me that, okay, I don't like, or, oh, I have that sense of jealousy, oh, I also can feel those petty emotions. So immediately we see or we feel a sense of fallout. But looking at that what I'm experiencing is a universal nature. So it is more like universal processes and individual experience. That is another indicator that whatever is happening in the world, whatever people are feeling, they're feeling love, they're feeling hate, they're feeling angry, fear, all of those things which people feel, they're universal processes. Every human being, or for that matter, I think other species also feel that. But the universal process, when interacts with the individual, depending on the make of the individual, the interaction happens. So it's like universal process is that you feel angry or you feel love or you feel whatever. It's a process. Now, depending on what this frame is, when that universal process interacts with this individual, like it, for example, in this case, it happens to be me. The moment this interaction happens, depending on what is the frame I've worked on, what is the base I've created, what is the, say, the ingredients of this component. So when a universal process interacts with the individual component, something comes out. So, and that is why integral yoga works on parallel processing. So one, you are connecting, you are making more and more connection with the universal forces. You're trying to understand them. You're trying to connect with peace, light, force, all of those things in your inner practices. And at the same time, you're trying to the individual frame which is given to you. You are really like to, like we say, you are your own laboratory. You're really trying to dissect and see that, oh, this is the reaction which I have when somebody does that, or this is the reaction which I have, or this is the expectation I hold, this is the worry I hold. So at one level, I'm connecting with the highest, the deepest. Another level, I'm just like trying to figure out that, okay, this is what bothers me, or these are my, like in modern language, we say, what are your trigger points? So we have also developed a kind of vocabulary which looks more very modern in terms of, oh, it's a process of self-work going on, and a very westernized way of looking at self. But the westernized way of looking at self, of course, it has its role. I mean, I'm not denying that fact. But we are looking at that framework through the universal framework, that we have that absolute support because of which we are able to like look at ourselves. Because if I have not created that adhar of self-work, and then I start nitpicking about my personality, it's dangerous, because there's a tendency of self-blame and self-loathing and all those concepts which you study in psychology, because then it's a question of my identity. Like we linked it from the ego, that then I'm like, oh, I'm not worth living. So for example, if somebody reads in the integral yoga literature and says that you have to purify yourself, so there's no room for desire, for example, like that's a blanket statement. And then I'm like, every morning till night, my life is driven by desire. I want to do this, I want to wear this, I want to eat this, I want to achieve this. So then fundamentally my life is wrong. But if I really understand the root of it, that it is half or part of my nature and it exists, it's the another half, the deeper half, which I have to activate and surrender that to, for it to clean it. So both exist in me is a fundamental attribute to begin. Because if I just look at half the picture, I'll be very, very disappointed. Then it's like you're saying what I identify with is not there, should not be there. Then what is there? So if simultaneously I'm aware of the universal and the individual, I slowly kind of like open that small window from where that universal is pouring in. I'm feeling that like the rasa, the joy of inner work. And in that joy, I'm like, okay, this desire needs to be catered. Okay, this needs to be addressed in a different way. Okay, I'll see what happens. So then you make your own concoction. I was like, oh, a little bit of faith I'll give in, little bit of patience I will give in, little bit of endurance I will give in. So then these are not just words, they become practices. So like how we said that, oh, I just passed on the authority of principles to you, and I was like, I'll gladly take the process. But the principles turn into process through your own work. Like that's the idea. And also just like it's a very another statement which I often overuse is that philosophy in action becomes psychology. And that is how more and more processes are discovered, more and more. Like today, if you look around, like especially the young people, everybody's aware of self-work. It's not something new. Like even 10 years, 15 years back when I was studying psychology, nobody was talking so much about self-work. But today, if you look at social media, everybody talks about self-work. But only the fundamental difference is that when we're talking about self-work in terms of integral yoga, we are basing our faith in a higher power to guide us. But when I'm talking about self-work in a much more open order, we are more trying to strengthen the ego rather than replacing the ego with the psychic. So that's the key difference between self-work in terms of just a psychological betterment or self-work in terms of from a yogic point of view. And the sooner we understand it, the better it is for a growth which is not just integral, but is also very much rooted in essence of who we are. So it's like strengthening the ego for like there's a lot of identity assertion, especially because I deal with young people so much. All are about like I'm just bringing it again and again to somehow that egoless got stuck in my head. But it's like oh, I have to stand my own ground. I have to speak, especially in terms of relationships. They're like I we have to communicate. It's all a lot about I in all its sincerity. So there's not something which is like not to be done. But in strengthening the ego, I'm still taking help from the outside world. But when you're looking at it from a yogic lens, the strength is coming from inside. And it's not creating so much of dependency on the outer world. Then outer world doesn't become like a shoulder to lean on, but a field to play. And that gives you a lot of freedom to work around. So the processes of integral yoga, like especially for example, we say that connect to the mother, call the mother, whatever is an individual, it's a very, very personal space for you. But to recognize and realize that that space is within me from where I get strength. And if I know, like, again, I keep telling this, that when I know that I have a home, I can go out and play because I know when I'll come back from playing, I will be served the food, I will have a bed to sleep, and I have like it's easy for me. So when I know the sense of home within me, I can play all in freedom. But if I don't have this grounding, if I don't have this home, then I'm not playing, I'm just wandering. So my wandering may look like play, but there is no sense of stability and surety in that wandering. So an appearance of confidence and a sense of certitude. There's a subtle difference between the two. And the subtle difference between a sense of outer confidence and inner certitude is what integral yoga brings in. Like the bridging of the inner and the outer, that is where it lands in. So I don't know where I land, but yeah, that's where I think I'll pause and maybe pass on to you and see what you have to say. And you're on mute, so you have to unmute.
Thank you, Aditi. Maybe I'll start where you finished. The sense of home allows the freedom in the play. I think that was a very important idea. Uh, uh, the home in the yoga is our psychic. So if we know that that is where ultimately everything is anchored, that is where we have to return, then the play, in the play, you have much more freedom and you know where you have to return and in relation to what all the play is about. That could be one way of looking at it. I don't know whether you meant that, but that's one idea that crossed my mind while you said that. Uh, a few other things that occurred to me while you were speaking was recognizing the indicators. And these indicators essentially are the type of unique gifts and talents we have received, the weaknesses that we have, the circumstances that we have. And that gives us a clue to what we are expected to do. So that gives us a clue to the outer work. And that outer work has its place. I'll come to that outer versus inner work. That's again you talked about. So that gives us a clue to the outer work. And essentially, it comes down to an expression of love through that outer work. And that love is expressed by giving what we have to those who need it. So uh, the work consists of giving what we have to those who need it. That complementary situation we can always find. And that's what becomes our outer work. But then this outer work itself has to be done in the yogic poise. And that is where we may find that we are not perfect. And in spite of all the knowledge, our practice may not match with the knowledge that we have about how this work should be done. Should be done in the spirit of karma yoga. I'll not go into the details of that. But then we find that it is not truly in the spirit of karma yoga as the Gita would expect of us towards the end of the Gita. Because just not being attached to the fruit is only in the second chapter. That is the beginning. But then there are many other aspects to karma yoga which evolve gradually as we go further in the Gita. So while I mean this can be a good beginning, that is not being attached to the fruit, that is not all what karma yoga is about. So as you understand karma yoga more and more, you find that the practice does not match the knowledge that we have. So then that creates a material for the inner work, because it is during that those moments of reflection, introspection, meditation, or whatever you may like to call it. But you need time for that also. And that is the time when you may not be seen running around, and to the outer world, it may look that you are not doing anything, as you said. So that inner work, that inner churning is also part of yoga. So the inner churning then should have a spillover effect and reflect in the outer work. The outer work should now conform more to the requirements of karma yoga. But still, it may not be perfect. So then again, that creates more uh, work for reflection, introspection. So the outer work creates material for inner work, and the inner work gets expressed in the way we do the outer work. And that's why the mother, one of the things that the mother has said is that my prayer should be that let me do in the best way I can the best thing to do. Now, she doesn't say let me do in the best way possible. Let me do in the best way I can, because I know I can't do it perfectly, but at least let me do in the best way I can. And what is it that I should do in the best way I can? The best thing to do. And who will tell me what the best thing to do is? My psychic being and all these indicators put together. Because the psychic being is a broad guideline, but exactly what I do in the best way I can, for that, the clue will come from these indicators. So that is how the outer work, the inner work, and the indicators fit in. And in traditional terminology, these indicators will be what we call our Swabhava and Swadharma put together. And that gives us a clue to what we should be doing. And that type of work then creates the material for the inner work. And then the inner outer work, as a result of that, will keep getting better. So the best that I can do will be better than what I could do earlier. Then this word which fascinated you, egoless. That's again important because it can be understood in so many ways. And even if we leave aside the uh, current jargon in which sometimes self uh, work and understanding your self worth and having some self esteem and so on, we leave aside that jargon which sometimes may end up strengthening the ego or uh, enhancing the ego. Even if we leave that aside, even in the traditional terms, the ego is not something which is totally undesirable. It helps us in worldly action, and it also helps us in turning to the spiritual path. Because when we find that I'm not getting a sense of fulfillment from living the way I'm living, then I say that, well, I'll now give a new direction to my life. When I say I'll give a new direction to my life, again, it is that I involved. So the beginning of the spiritual path is also directed by the ego. And in fact, it goes a long way with us in even on the spiritual path. And the time to reach a state of total egolessness comes pretty late on the spiritual path. And it essentially comes when we find that the ego, instead of being a helper on the path, Aurobindo has said that it can be the helper, it can be the bar. So the time when it stops becoming a helper and becomes a bar is when we find that attachments to possessions, attachments to relationships, they start becoming an obstacle for further progress. So that is the time when time comes for becoming egoless, and by then the person has evolved sufficiently for it to not require much effort. It drops off. Sort of the ego drops off. You don't have to make a special effort to eliminate the ego. Those efforts, violent efforts at an early stage to get rid of the ego because it is something bad, are bound to fail. So these were a few comments which occurred to me while you were speaking. In the meantime, I'm sure some more ideas have crossed your mind which you may like to share.
Hmm. One thing that comes out is, especially when you said, no, in the beginning it is about the ego, which is, of course, like if we replace the word ego with the instrument, of course, our instrument has some shortcomings. Another part of the instrument sees those shortcomings. It wants to rectify them, wants to become better. And all of these things, one leads to another. And that is why we keep saying that it's the purification of intention that is key on the path. And once we work on the purification of intention, the action is always a byproduct of intention. So if I can get hold of my intention at as early as possible, like where is it stemming from, and if I start working there, then whatever action comes out of me will be in service to the world, will be more purified. Of course, everything has a scope to become better. But directly, I think integral yoga also gives us a space because it is such an inner work to become so much aware of the intention behind the action. And the more and more we spend enough time with our own intentions and asking us the right kind of questions, and with, like, I think the first thing to begin with is to make friends with time. I think that is the key to really walk the path. And I'm sure in any scope of self work, but in particular in my own experience, integral yoga, because if I drop the burden of time, because time brings in the burden of proving, of reaching, and it brings much more complications, it brings in comparison, it brings in a sense of loss. And in a way, it's very fascinating because we are talking about an eternal component and a temporal component together. Because my instrument is still in the framework of temporal component of life, because I'm aging, I'm say move, there's a certain sense of movement in my surface. And aging is not just physical aging. The more I live, the more emotional experiences I have, the more mental experiences I have. And if I'm living in middle of the world, I have responsibilities, and responsibilities change with time. So there's a temporal component in my personality, which no matter what, it moves because time moves. And if I associate my work, my inner work with what is moving, I will always be caught up in the push and pull because that movement is more from the circumstances which are given to me from the world than my inner journey. So it's a constant conscious effort to bring my journey to the eternal component and get the fuel from that eternal component. Because if I attempt to get the fuel of my self work from the temporal component, I will always have a sort sense of either losing out or rushing in. So that, to just free myself from that sense of just caught up in that pull and push of the world, I know that that's my responsibility. That's how I've shaped up my life, whichever stage of my life I'm at. Be it I'm a student or I'm a working professional, I have a house to take care, irrespective of what my so-called social duties or obligations, or just I want to do it. It's not even an obligation. I enjoy being a part of the world. So that comes as a part of my temporal personality. But my personality also has an eternal component, which is in a way turning more and more towards its source. So, see, none of this is out of balance. My outer personality is a part of the outer nature, so it will naturally be pulled towards the world. It will want what the world wants. It will want to be there, please the world. All of those things will happen because it is a product of the nature, no? It is product of the world. And my inner component is the product of the divinity within. It will naturally gravitate towards. So, be it ego, be it the inner being, they are just trying to be more closer to their origin. That's all. And because we are in the middle, we always feel that pull of either to go in and do that inner work or go out. But if I really bring in and see that, okay, this outer part of me, this inner part of me, let's live together. So the moment I realize that I don't have to choose between eternal or temporal, I just have to align them. And aligning is my yogic journey. That more and more, imagine, or even just go back to the experience when you really felt one with yourself. You are still a part of the outer world, but it's the sense of oneness comes from that eternity. So the more and more in my everyday practice, I bring in the eternal and temporal together, that strengthens my journey. And that drops the idea of, oh, I'm missing something or I've not achieved something, to really just remind yourself that we are following that spark which we have. It begins with a sense of spark, and the sense translates into experience of spark and then expression of spark. So it's a journey one has to undertake. And all of us who are inclined towards these things, like for example, all of us present here, we all have at least a sense of the spark. And if I don't leave the sight of that spark and get pulled away into the temporal component and give enough time, it is like the gestation period. So, really holding that spark within me, protecting it, it will slowly grow into an experience which will then start bringing its flavor out in my temporal life as well. So my temporal life will become beautiful not by another temporal components, but my own eternal component. So what does a journey of yoga do? A journey of yoga brings in me my eternal and temporal together. So the yogic beat, like you were talking about, Shrabinder, has synthesized different schools of yoga. So every school of yoga starts from one temporal aspect of your personality. It can take your emotions, your thoughts, your physical, whatever, and connects you to the eternal in you. And Shrabinder is saying all three are you, no? So let's take all three. So let's not leave it. So we take all the three components of our temporal and see that, okay, one might be more, you might be more inclined towards one because that's your nature. And so the idea is still focused towards the eternal. And then he's like, the beauty is once you get even a sense of that eternity in you, then that eternity will start telling you that, okay, your mind will do this. So it's like how we say, no, either be governed by the ego or guided by the psychic. So that guidance emerges. And then you have, like, again, like coming back to the same point where we started, we start playing in the temporal. So then we are not disconnected with the temporal. We are not rejecting the temporal. We are just taking the guidance from the eternal to work in the temporal so that your function improves. Because end of the day, yoga, no yoga, every human being you meet on the road, you're like, what do you want? I want to be happy. I want to be the best version of myself. It's just that because I don't have the background knowledge, I think the world is coming in my way. And if the world becomes better, people become better, I will become better. But if I have a sense of the universal, as like if I connect with the universal, I become better, the world becomes better. So it's the change of that orientation, which is given by yoga. And specifically, we're talking about integral yoga. So yeah, I think that can be a good closing space for me. And if you want to add anything to it.
Maybe I'll start with the point where you were talking about the all parts of the being, the body and the mind, being taken together and making them sort of more and more in tune with or aligned with the deepest self or the psychic being or the soul. Uh, this is one of the. I'm trying to deduce sort of the principles from the processes that you talked about. Now, this is one of the important principles in integral yoga, that we don't neglect any part of the being. We take all of them together. And uh, the division, even if it's there in our mind, it's only for convenience. And the two can't be, I mean, the body and the mind can't be divorced from each other. And the two can't progress unless they are both aligned with the deepest self or the soul, of which the dynamic aspect is the psychic being. And another thing you talked about is that uh, although the body and the mind function in the temporal zone, the search is for the eternal. And oneness comes only from eternity. That reminded me of, uh, something that the mother said. Once she was asked, how can humanity become one? How can true oneness of humanity be realized? And she gave a very simple answer in just one sentence. She says, by becoming more conscious of its origin. So if human beings become more conscious of their origin, then they'll automatically become one. What would be more natural for a set of pots to realize their oneness or become aware of their oneness truly than to realize that they are made of the same clay and they were shaped by the same potter. So it's that origin which gives you that sense of oneness. So long as we live in the superficial reality, we'll see so many differences that will keep emphasizing, and therefore oneness will remain only a distant dream. But it's only when we go back to our origin and realize that we are all manifestations of the same divine, that divine became each one of us and the rest of the creation, uh, the will actually become more aware of that oneness in terms of that origin. Like the pots, once they become aware of the clay and the potter. Or in simple language, we'll feel one if we realize that we are all children of the same God, in the simplest words. So that is sort of the oneness coming from eternity. Then you talked about the purification of intention. And earlier you talked about the desires being natural. So the intention is in integral yoga is not to kill desires. Because like the ego and the desires go together. Like the ego, the desires, killing the desires will also be a futile attempt. What is important is purification of the desires. Desires are a sort of an intention, what you want to get. So purification of the desires. And as your desires get more and more purified, uh, you want things, but you want something of a higher level. And then we start calling it an aspiration. And Aurobindo said that even aspiration will not be enough. All the feeling that you put into aspiration will not be enough. And all the enthusiasm that you have for realizing the aspiration will not be enough without the necessary willpower. So determination is still required. So on one hand, one needs the will to work. Otherwise, all these will remain at the level of intentions, good intentions, and strong feelings. But nothing will actually happen unless we also have the determination. And coupled with that determination, what is required is the willingness to endure, persevere, and even willingness to suffer. Because anything new will pull us out of our comfort zone, and therefore some suffering will be there. So to go through that suffering laughingly, and whatever scars it leaves behind, not to be conscious of those scars. Instead of harping on those scars, think of where you are to go next. So the goal you should not deflect you from the goal. Just thinking of that suffering and harping on the scars can stop you where you are. So aspiration. And two other tools or principles or pillars of sadhana, which we talk about in integral yoga: rejection and surrender. Rejection of everything that comes in the way, and surrender to the divine will. And then another clue I got was from make friends with time. Because no matter what we do need time. And that gives us another set of important principles in integral yoga, and that is the four aids. Four aids in integral yoga. These things, four aids, the three pillars, these are important because since there's no clear-cut path laid out in integral yoga, and these small little hints and guidelines acquire great value. The three pillars: aspiration, rejection, and surrender, and the four aids. First of these aids is Shastra, that is the written word. The second is the Guru, that is what we get from the Guru. And what we get from the Guru is not just words, it's more important than the word is the example, and even more important than the example of the Guru is the influence, the subtle influence of the Guru. And the third important aid is Utsah, that is an enthusiasm and effort on the part of the seeker. And the fourth is time. So all four are important. And let me illustrate it with a common everyday example. Uh, Suppose I want to make herbal tea. And yeah, Aditi is coughing, she needs herbal tea. So suppose I want to make herbal tea. I read a book on making herbal tea. It tells me which all spices can be used, the spices which will be good in summer, which one is winter, which one is in the rainy season. And then I should not boil these spices in water. I should put these spices at the bottom of a cup and pour boiling water over it, and so on. All that I am told. And then let the boiling water stay with the lid on the cup for 2 or 3 minutes before you consume it, so that the aroma settles down. All that I read. Hmm. When I start actually making it, all that knowledge I find is inadequate, because what he says is add a pinch of ginger. I don't know how much a pinch is. So then suppose Aditi is around me with standing with me in the kitchen. I ask her, how much is a pinch? It says a pinch of ginger. What she does is she picks up a spoon and at the tip of the spoon she picks up a bit of ginger and adds it at the bottom of the cup. She need not say a word. Still, she has taught me what a pinch is. Huh? और एट द मोस्ट शी में से इतना ही होता है, अंदाजे से डालते हैं, हो गया. Now, that is so, which means that we need a guru. So Aditi becomes the guru who can even work in silence without saying anything. She can just add a pinch. Now, the time. The first time I make it, with all this, still it may not be the best. If I keep working on it again and again, the herbal tea gets better, which means that there is always scope for improvement, there's scope for progress, and there's no substitute for time. And all this starting right from the search of knowledge in the Shastra and finding the Guru, and then putting in all the, doing the thing, practicing what you've learned from the Shastra and the Guru, needs effort, needs utsaha. He calls it utsaha, not prayas, because it's enthusiastic effort. Utsaha is enthusiastic. So without that vitality and enthusiasm, one will not go through the entire process. And then, while all that is important, patience is also important because it will take time. You can't cut the process short. Yoga is a sort of a shortcut in a way. It cuts short the journey of the soul to some extent. But all the same, there is no shortcut in yoga itself. And this shortcut of yoga, which looks like a shortcut on the journey of the soul, also we discover not by chance, but because we are ready for that type of shortcut as a result of the homework put in previous lives. So we arrive at a state of receptivity, at such a sense of receptivity that right from early life, our childhood onwards, we are inclined in a certain direction, we develop certain tastes and tendencies, and given the right time, the right trigger, the right circumstances, we deviate from the well-trodden path on something different. So that is how it happens. And then we find that the further progress or further progress in the journey of the soul is no longer just a matter of hit and try. It's not accidental, it becomes conscious. And it is this conscious process that yoga is about. So yoga is nothing but conscious evolution of the soul. And so I think with that, we have just a few minutes left for any questions that we may have. And Aditi already said that that was her closing space. And as usual, I end up speaking much more than is necessary. But still, luckily, we have a few minutes for questions.
There's one in the chat box. I'll just read it out if you want to answer it. That sometimes it is said by some teachers in the West that integral yoga is a yoga without method. But Aurobindo, in his definition of yoga, starts by saying that yoga is a methanized effort. And I think it's methanized effort towards self-perfection. That's the statement. So if you have some thoughts on that.
There's a difference between there being a set method and yoga being a methodized effort. Yes, there is no set method. Sri Aurobindo has said that also. There's no set method, prescribed method, or a definite method for practicing integral yoga. But at the same time, it's a methodized effort. What methodized effort means is that it's not a haphazard effort. It's a method which has a certain discipline around it. It has a method which is well contemplated and goal directed. So that is what makes it methodized. I mean, this would be some sort of elaboration which I immediately could come up with for describing a methodized effort. And one analogy one can give is, say you have water boiling. Huh? Now this water which is boiling can just be lost. The steam will keep escaping into the air. It doesn't serve much purpose. But the same steam, if you trap it in a pressure cooker, then it's able to cook the food much faster. So the steam remains the same, but by using a certain method, by having a certain discipline around the same force, that is the steam force, you've been able to accomplish something important. So that becomes methodized effort instead of haphazard effort or effort which you are just doing aimlessly, like steam going into the air.
But also, if I may add, It's a very over discussed idea also, no, whenever we talk about yoga in general. But also I realize that because we have a tendency, that something new has to be catered to the mind first. So we look for the method in that sense of how to do it. But also I realize, especially in terms of yoga, like when I look at Shrabindo's work, it's so clear that he said that you have to say in a very simple word, he's like, you have to become the best version of yourself. If we really loosely translate it, like really to the common, that you just become the best in you or the highest in you. And that is the what say that the what is answered. That what needs to be done, you have to become the best version or the highest version of yourself. Now, how it can be done. So after the what is catered, the usually this how. And in fact, when we discuss the process, it's the how. Now, how will you become the better version of yourself? By accessing the better version inside of you. So how will I become the highest in me? By accessing the highest in me. And who knows the best way to access the highest in me? I know that because it's inside of me. So that is why it becomes not just methodized in that sense, it becomes personalized. So it is more like a personalized prescription and not a universal prescription. The what is the universal that you need to become, like recognize the divinity within you, let the psychic replace the ego. All those things, the literature is full of what needs to be done. But the how will only come from depending on what is your entry point. So if you just go deeper into Shobindo's work, the how is like, say, self work is the how. Now, if you, the how focuses on self, the more it unfolds, like petal by petal, the how discovers itself. So if I unfold the vital in me, I was like, oh, there are certain vital disturbances which needs to work in me so that I can reach to the best capacity of my mind. So that becomes my journey. If somebody else comes in and there's like, for them, the mind is something which needs to be addressed first. So then they address the mind, they clear the thoughts and all of those things, then they enter the vital. So the how determines more of the, say, behind the scene work. And that is why it's very difficult if you want to approach it through the intellectual field, that what needs to be done. So, and for some people, when we have these discussions, the easiest or another answer can be you can incorporate the what of other schools of yoga. Like if you are saying that, okay, you sit in meditation, you say that, okay, integral yoga, you can sit for meditation. But what happens in the meditation is yoga. Meditation is not yoga. So you can still borrow the how of other schools, but still the internal subtle part is the how which is happening inside of you. So that is also another way of looking at it. And yeah, I mean, it's a, no, I'll just stop here. Yeah. So I think the what and how can be combined together for catering to the surface.
Sure, I mean, one can make that much of concession to the uh, sort of need which many feel that I do need a method. One can take the method from other schools, but then with the full understanding that that itself is not the end. What happens during that, I'll say during meditation, is what is important, and that it is permissible, it's acceptable, but with the proviso that you try and focus on what is happening during the meditation. And also, if you can't meditate, doesn't disqualify the person from the practice of integral yoga. So, in other words, I mean, there's the prescription is that there's a methodized effort, but what that method is still has to be, as you said, personalized. Any other questions?
Read out, there's a question in the chat box. I'll read that. There is this duality in me which is bothering me since long. It's like one part of me constantly says, you know nothing. And at the same time, when I look others, I get the feeling of I am something and I know at least better than him or her, which feeds my ego and seeks some pleasure through it. And I'm stuck in this loop, which is constantly comparing myself with others and criticizing myself. What and how is the way through this?
In a way, you have answered your own question by not comparing. Each one of us has our own individual journey to perform. And in a way, we are all ignorant. The difference is only in the degree of ignorance.
Yeah, I think also it's like when we say no, don't compare. I mean, in a way, all of us know that it need not be done, but all of us do it in some way or the other. So also another process, if you may want to call it, is compare yourself how much ever you want to compare. Then just take that process as like how you enjoy watching movies. It's like, okay, this is what I think about myself. Or it's like how you imagine or enjoy shows, no? Like certain scenes come up and you're just like, this is the scene I enjoy, this is the scene I don't enjoy. So then you can use that exercise of comparison if it's so involuntary in you to recognize that what are the points of comparison which again and again come. So take that activity as a process of self-work. If you're not able to reject the activity, use the activity. And if you will use it constructively, whatever it has to serve, it will serve and it will drop automatically. But if you constantly want to fight it without knowing what it is serving in you, it will keep coming back and hurting you more and more. So if I'm like, okay, I have a personality which is more fearful of the world, and I comparison is my natural go-to. That comes to me. That's who I am. So I'm like, okay, this is the point, or maybe how intelligent the person is, or if I want to, in any domain, if I'm comparing, so I just take away the domain of comparison and see what is my individual personalized relationship with that domain and can I work on it. So then comparison becomes a key to unlock my hidden potentials. So use it. And when you will start using it, you will realize when it will serve, when it will not serve. And then, because the moment you get hold of something which is bothering you, it goes like puss. But if you're not able to hold it well, it looks like a giant to you and it was like, oh, it's bothering me. So just look into the eyes, see what it gives you, and then just sail through it. And that is how we started with saying, no, that all life is yoga and all of those things. That if comparison is a trigger of my surface personality, I use it to go with it. So yeah, that's a suggestion. You can try it out. And if you're genuinely sincere of looking it in the eye and seeing, okay, what do you want to tell me? It will tell you. But if you're just using it as an excuse of not working on a certain part of you, then you will just like continuously be at loggerheads with it. So try this out and see, it might help you. It sounded like a prescription to me. Like I said, try it out and see. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Yeah, maybe if we can, if somebody wants to unmute and say something, or otherwise we can maybe just close if you want to add something.
If nobody has anything to further ask or comment, then maybe we can close with a minute of silence as usual.
Sure. All right. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining and listening to our conversation. I hope it helps all of us grow. So, thank you.